Hello everyone, very good evening. Can you hear me? And I see a lot of people here, around 50 of you, and I hope there'll be a lot more joining us. All right, so we are going to talk a little bit about health and nutrition, and I think it's important for all of us to. I think it's so important to know a little bit about health and nutrition and lead a healthy lifestyle. Very actually, just today I heard a colleague of mine who is also 44 like me underwent an angioplasty. So that is a very scary thought, and quite a routine event nowadays. So how do we combat this, and how do we get healthy? And so that's what we are actually going to talk about. Before I start, I thought I'll make a couple of comments, simple comments. First is that glucose is not sweet to taste. So anything we eat that is sweet may not have glucose. Fructose is sweet. So if you're eating something and you think you're not eating glucose because it's not sweet, अरे मीठा नहीं है, it's okay, is perhaps not the right approach. Fructose is sweet, right? So we are not talking about fructose at all today. So sort of the take home message from this slide is that I'm not going to sugarcoat anything, and it's not going to sound sweet, but then it's going to be mighty effective and hopefully transformative as we go ahead. So try and focus on this and don't look at your screens. Only look at this presentation, and we'll get underway. I think physical fitness, first and foremost, all of us need to prioritize this, in our lives, and really prioritize it, as in just not talk about it, but actually do it. And the fact that all of you are on this live call suggests that you are already thinking about at least prioritizing it. The second is it should not require any willpower. I think willpower is a very finite entity, and all of us have only that much of willpower. And I think it's important to use it in our professional lives, in our personal lives, to grow, to build, and do other things. But for fitness, if you start requiring willpower, it's going to compromise a lot of other things. So let's try and keep that out so that it becomes sustainable. Remember that it should not definitely involve starving. There is a fine difference between starving and fasting that we'll talk about slightly later. But starving means that you are not eating but you are hungry, and fasting is you are not hungry and you're not eating. There's a lot of difference if you actually think about it, but then the words are just, there is a not here. You're not hungry and you're hungry, right? So no starving. That's a big very important thing to remember and understand. And it should not be physically taxing, isn't it? So if you're carrying residual fatigue on a daily basis over to the next day, and then to the day after, then that's all going to break down, right? And so either you're going to get injured, or you're just going to say, oh, this is not going to work, right? So I think these are few fundamental things that we should also keep in mind when we are starting out right at the beginning. And the approach that I'm going to try and bring out here will show you that these are all very much possible. I think most of you know me, but for some of you who don't, so I am predominantly an ophthalmologist. So I think some of you can mute your own mics so that there is not much echo. So try and just mute your own mics, right? So then I am mainly a vitreoretinal surgeon. I'm an ophthalmologist and I practice in Mumbai. And I did some research training at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, where I really understood how to make sense of data and statistics and all of that. I have published more than 220 papers so far and counting, and I have assisted more than 150 papers through my research academy, which we won't talk about much today. I was the associate editor of the Indian Journal of Ophthalmology and the IGO case reports, and I was enlisted in the Stanford University top 2% list of researchers in the world very recently based on your citations. So I hope I'll be able to give you a unique perspective, and if nothing else, what I will definitely be able to do is extract info from all the large number of publications. This is actually juicing out everything that I've read over the last 6 months or so, from about 60 or 70 very influential papers or published articles that we'll take a look at a little bit later on, and also some books, some podcasts, and all of those other things. So I'm going to extract all this info, and I hope I can bring it to you in a very succinct manner, based given that my training has been in research and publications and statistics. So I'll quickly go over my own story for the next 10 minutes or so that you think I show you that it is actually possible and it's relatively easy, and then we'll see the actual approach that I have managed to sort of crystallize and bring it to you. So if this is a photograph of an average 43-year-old Joe in India, relatively successful, and traveling across the country, giving lectures, having a relatively okay clinical practice. So so if you look at this individual here or this individual here, you will say, okay, there's nothing special about the guy. He looks okay. He doesn't look unhealthy, but actually internally I really was exceedingly unhealthy. So it's very difficult to say. So what I would feel early in the morning is tiredness. You get up in the morning and you say, oh, that there is a word in Marathi, it's called vaitag. It's like, oh, I'm tired early in the morning and I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to do this, and can I take an off today? I don't know how many of you felt this way, but then if you start feeling this way, there is something majorly wrong. And I started feeling this for a while, and I said, okay, now let me start running and let me start getting rid of this these issues. So if you see, this is May 2023 and this is October 2023. Again, this is May 2023, and these are relatively large distances, about 9.5 kilometers. This is 5.5 kilometers, and the pace is not that fast. However, I was not at all able to shrug this off. I was still tired in the mornings. I was running regularly, and people talk about that 21-day rule or 21-day law, where if you do it enough on a regular basis or consistently for 21 days, it becomes a habit. But then I did it for more than 30 days and it did not become a habit. And every now and then I had high chances of getting injured. I was getting pain in my legs, in my shins, in my knees, and what have you. And I was not getting faster at all. So there was something definitely wrong. I was tired throughout the day. I would go in the morning and do 8-9 kilometers. That's a lot. As you will see later on, if you run a petrol car on diesel, it's not going to go too far, right? So that is really what was happening, and it might actually be happening to some of you who are running but are not fueling properly, right? So I was still tired throughout the day, getting that residual tiredness to the next day, and then still trying to push on, and so that is never good. So then the major event happened in my life. I lost my father on October 9th, 2023 to be precise. And the way that it happened, he was relatively healthy, and as you can see in the photograph, it was taken only a couple of months before he passed away. So he was relatively okay. He was a little bit overweight, but as you would say, anybody who's age 70, he's relatively okay and healthy. But then in 15 minutes he was gone. He was with us and then he was gone, and I just couldn't do anything. And on that day I decided that something like this cannot happen to me. And so not at 70, not at 80, not at 90, right? So not that you can choose how you go, but yet this is something that I very much was shaken up by. For the next 1.5-2 months, I was really at the bottom of my moods. And as you can understand, once you lose your father, then what actually cheered me up was this event. This was a 25 years reunion of my college mates or my MBBS batch. As you can see, this was me, and if I can move this over, so this is how I was in December 2023. That's barely 7 months back, and these are all my batchmates. As you will see, there are different people in different colors and different shapes and different sizes, right? Some of them are exceedingly fit and doing like ultra marathons. And then some of them were worse off than me as well. So so this was the time when I actually decided that something's got to give. So this was actually 25th of December 2023, and this is my medical college, that is Kim's Karad. And on this day I thought something has to change. And this wasn't really a typical meal, but quite close to what a lot of us eat. We eat rice, we eat some dal, and we eat some curry, we eat some sweets on and off, we eat some dahi, and then perhaps some non-veg, some paneer here and there, and some fries and all of that. So this was not a absolute typical meal on a daily basis, but at least half of this was what I was eating on a daily basis. And as you can see, this gentleman here is quite proud of everything that he's able to eat and put inside him, right? So खा के मज़ा है, that's sort of the I live to eat, sort of the attitude was that way. Then I started talking to people, and some people said eat little bit every 2 hours, and some people said eat once in 10 hours. So there was a huge variability in what people told me, including diabetologists, some colleagues, friends, nutritionists, dietitians, what have you. And I was utterly confused, and I said, now is the time to actually put my statistics and research skills in use and do my own study and study the facts and understand what is happening. And that is when I realized you need to eat well. Let's quickly look at some of these. This is a supplement. I'll show you this later on. These are some sprouts. These are eggs. These are strawberries. I continued by running, and this was consistent effort on a daily basis. So this was about 1.5-2 month period, the consistency is the key. But because I was fueling well, I was able to do these things. As you can see, the pace has improved significantly, and over a period of time. So I'll show you some of these images later as well. So it was really a 2.0 self. It was more energetic, and what I really realized pretty quickly was when I saw these. These are all my weight recordings, and so another take-home message is, please document everything that is happening to your body. So I was 103 kilos when I started out, and then I was very reluctant to stand on the weighing machine. I was reluctant to do anything, though I started my diet regimens, and that I'll talk about a little bit more. But then in 20 days I had lost 10 kilos. From 103 I came to 93. So in 20 days I was losing half a kilo on a daily basis. I was that overweight. It's not really that you're losing that much, but that you are that overweight. So I was supposed to be 78 to 80 kilos, but I was 103 kilos. So when that delta effect is so much, you will lose a lot right at the beginning. So in 10 days, in 20 days I lost 10 kilos, and then if you see, this has been a consistent drop in weight. The biggest part is those 20 days that I lost 10 kilos, I did not run, I did not jog, I did not do anything. I was sort of pretty much consigned to the fact that I'm going to get injured. But then I realized that something is happening, right? I realized that I need to understand what is happening, though I think I'm doing the right thing. And that is when I started documenting, and all of those 6 months of documentation has actually culminated into today that we are discussing, right? So these are all my weights. So now I'm currently about 78.5 kilos. So as you can see, this is from 103 to 78 over about 6 months or so. So 25 kilos in 25 weeks. That's like 1 kilogram a week, right? So that's like that's a lot of weight loss. But then I'm here to tell you that it is very, very possible, and it does not take a lot of skill. It does not take, it just takes some knowledge. So this is how I was 2023 December, and March 24 I was 87 kilos, and this was a lot of truncal obesity, and please document some of this, and you may not show it to everyone, but there's a lot of visceral fat, and this was like tight and taut. But this is within 3 months. There's some subcutaneous fat, but there's a lot of loss of visceral fat, and there is some stretch marks happening and other things. And so now I am a little bit like that, right? So this is you might call it dramatic, but then I'll show you that it's not only me, but a lot of people have actually done it. So this is how I was before and after. So I realized that my behaviors have changed, right? So what is this health behavior about? So it includes actions that lead to better quality health and lifestyle. You must eat well, being physically active, and these affect health and decrease your risks such as smoking and alcohol intake, right? So overall, this is in a nutshell. So eat well, exercise. It sounds easy, and I'll show you that it actually is. And if you're smoking, definitely try and quit it. If you're drinking excessive alcohol, the word excessive is subjective, but still, having a little alcohol on and off is all right, but having excessive alcohol on a very regular basis is perhaps not that good, right? So these are some of my meals. So I would eat like 2 meals a day. And so that is 14 and 10, where you're fasting for 14 hours and you're eating for 10 hours, in a 10-hour period. And I'll show you some, evidence-based papers which show that this is perhaps the right or the best way to go. So when you eat only twice a day, what you need to first do is eat a lot of food, because you need to extend, keep that for prolonged periods of time. And you can eat a lot, and you can't eat too much carbohydrates at a time. You can try and see by eating 200 grams of rice when it's cooked, and it's almost impossible to do, right? But then you can actually eat 4 or 5 eggs all together at once, right? So what I was really doing was cutting out carbohydrates. I was concentrating on proteins, high protein and relatively high fat diet, right? So that is essentially what it was. If you see this meal, these are eggs, boiled eggs. This is some shredded, some vegetables with mushrooms, and this is some fried fish. And this is again eggs. This is this is some sprouts, and this is curd. Again, that is relatively good in protein. And this is again an omelette. So different ways of cooking eggs, and this is some chana, or you can have chole, along with. Let me just move this, so you can have this kind of meal, so what this is high protein. This is some chicken as well thrown in there. This is high protein as well as high fat, that's because it's animal protein, and whatever comes with, whatever fat comes with animal protein. Before you ask me, is the yellow of the egg okay? The answer really is yes, right? Because it has a lot of nutrients. All that fat is good fat, right? So whatever fat comes with the animal protein is good fat, right? And these are all fiber, right? So if you don't have fiber along, you will quickly start getting constipated, and it's not that fun, right? So high protein and high fat along with fiber, I think this is what I initially started to do. So this is for vegetarians. This is if you can't eat meat, this is paneer. And remember that we'll talk about it a little bit more also, but you need 1 gram protein per kilogram ideal body weight if you're not doing any physical activity. And if you are doing some running or weightlifting or something, you need about 1.5 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight. So for me, I was 80 grams, my ideal body weight was 80 kilograms. So I needed 80 grams of protein. So you need to actually go and understand which food stuff has how much protein in it. So 100 grams of protein will give you about, give and take about 20 to 25 grams of protein, right? So this is paneer. You can actually have tofu, and then tofu is soya bean. It looks very similar and doesn't taste as bad. There is something called tempeh, which is fermented tofu, and fermentation has a lot of advantages which we can't talk about today. But fermented tofu, fermented soya, that is called tempeh, has even more amount of fat, protein. So 100 grams will give you almost 40 to 42 grams of protein, right? So that's a lot of protein. That's almost like one chicken breast, right? So paneer or tofu based are your ways of protein. If you are vegan, then even the curd and the paneer is out, right? So then you're really looking at mainly tofu. I'm talking about rich sources of protein, right? So pulses, dals, all of these have proteins, but also have a lot of carbs or carbohydrates, right? So we don't want to get into that right at the beginning. So paneer and tofu are your go-tos when you are a vegetarian, but remember that pulses and seeds and all of these are also all right, but then they won't give you large amounts of protein, right? So you have to eat a lot to have that much amount of protein, right? And also I took omega-3 supplements, and as well as magnesium, and that has to be in glycinate form. And that's because it's important for recovery, right? Because if you're doing some weightlifting or you're doing walking or something like that, you need recovery, and magnesium is really important, and it's not there in most of our regular food stuff. So these two supplements are, I think, something that you all must think about if you're looking at this kind of diet. So it's not just me who has done this. I have photographs of at least 50-60 people. Some of them have consented, and I'm putting this up. So this lady is wearing the same dress, and some of you may know her. She's an ophthalmologist. So this is in November of 2023, and this is very recently. I clearly see the huge difference. This is another gentleman, again an ophthalmologist and a good friend. And so as you can see, the face, it's you can't really recognize this individual almost, right? So this person looks happy and energetic, and of course much thinner. Some more photographs. So this is another ophthalmologist who actually reached out to me and said, this is how I am and this is how I want to be. And he's actually reached there in lesser time than I have, right? And so you can clearly see the huge difference, and the smile. There's a lot of influence on mental health, which we'll also talk about. And this is my own brother. So you can clearly see, you'll realize that if you ask people for photographs pre diet, they'll say, oh, we don't have that many. Why? Because people don't take selfies, and they are not so comfortable posing in front of cameras. But now once you change, you see, wow, see a huge number of selfies, and you tell them, can you send me a pic? And they'll say, oh yeah, sure. And it's there, right there. So humongous amount of change is happening in so many people, and I hope some of you will be able to adopt some of these things that we will look at. The real question is this approach working for all? So what I discovered with all my readings and all my discussions with some of the experts, we'll deep dive into this, and we'll try and crystallize this approach so that you can actually take it home, right? So so what if you did it? Can I do it? Is the real question, right? So that's the whole point of this webinar. So let's deep down into some of this. For that, you need to understand that there are three basic types of food or macronutrients. One is carbohydrates, which are predominantly the fuel that our body uses. The second is fats, which is used for fuel as well as for structure of the body. Like the meninges and others have a lot of fat. The brain has a lot of fat, which is part of the brain structure, but the brain can't use fat for fuel, whereas most other structures in the body, cells in the body can use fat for fuel, and that has implications that we'll talk about later on. And protein, of course, protein is the most important for structure. Everything from your hair to your nails to your skin to your bone structure to to your hormones, to so many other things are all protein, right? So protein is extremely important for structure and function, and to remain healthy. So these are the three ones, and we are going to really look at some of these, and and it's going to be an interplay about decreasing one, increasing the other, in a way where it gets you the reset button, and you are able to maintain good health. So these are the three that we'll actually talk about. So when I was reading about all this, I stumbled upon something called insulin resistance, and which is the real it is at the heart of almost everything. So if someone is getting an angioplasty in his mid-40s, you have to ask, what are his insulin levels? None of the physicians I know today are actually getting insulin levels done, right? So this is an emerging sort of area of study, and we'll look at a live PubMed demonstration to show you that most of the literature on insulin resistance has evolved over the last 4 or 5 years. Almost 60% of literature is after COVID or 2020, 21 and later on. So how this happens is we have too much of carbohydrates, that's glucose. Remember that glucose, we'll take examples of some of the Indian foodstuffs that we eat, but we are eating too much of carbohydrates, which are getting broken down to glucose and getting into a circulation. This leads to insulin resistance. We'll see why. And this insulin resistance starts affecting fat cells, skeletal muscles, and liver. This is just a basic overview of all of this. So we'll take a look at each of these. What do I mean by too much carbohydrate? This is a typical Indian breakfast. So all of it is carbohydrates. So this is dosa, this is upma, this is vada, this is chole puri, this is this is misal pav on the bottom right. These are idlis, this is dhokla, this is some aloo parathe. So all of this is entirely carbohydrates. So when you consume this early in the morning, you are getting high glucose levels in your blood, right? The glucose is going up, and what this is doing is releasing insulin. So some of you who are not medical, not in the medical field, this is an organ called the pancreas. I'll just quickly play this again. This is deep down, hidden behind the stomach and the liver, and it produces this small hormone that's called insulin. And the main job of insulin is to actually drive away all the glucose from the bloodstream into cells. So how it really works is insulin, on every target cell there is something called a receptor, and it works something with something like a lock and key model. So the insulin is the key, and there is a lock on every cell. So what insulin does is it sort of combines to the cell, and then it rotates a key. There is a wall that opens, or there is a door really that opens, and sugar enters into the cell. And let's talk about a fat cell, for example. So if this is a fat cell and this is a receptor, this is the insulin molecule. Let's trace it. It attaches here, and then it opens up a door, and this sugar molecule has entered inside. This is really what is happening in a regular physiologic state, right? So this is when insulin is actually acting. Now what is happening with insulin resistance? Let me quickly draw and show you. So let's take this on the x-axis. This is times of the day, right? So say these are from 8 a.m. to say 12, right? So all the way to 6, and then say night 10 o'clock, right? So these are different times of the day, and on the y-axis we are looking at blood sugar levels, all the way from somewhere around say 100, say about 200 or so, right? So when you're actually having a breakfast, let me change colors. Say when you're having breakfast, say about 7:30 or so, you are having carbs or carbohydrates. That's going to lead to a spike in your sugar level by say 45 minutes. So by 8:30 your sugar is going to go to 115, 120, sometimes 150, depending on what you eat, and then slowly it's going to come down in, and over about 2.5 hours is going to come back to baseline. What is making this come back to baseline is insulin, right? You guessed that right? So insulin is also going to mirror this sugar, and then insulin is going to come down, but it's going to take slightly longer time, about 4 hours or so in a normal individual. Sugar has come down, insulin hasn't. But guess what? At around 10 o'clock, we are having tea again, right? You're having some tea biscuit or something like that. So the sugar has spiked up again. and by the time it has come back, oh, it's 1 o'clock, it's lunchtime. Before it's come to baseline, we are going to have another meal, and this time with lunch, with all the carbohydrates that we eat, it's going to go up quite significantly. And by the time it's come down, it's about 5 o'clock, we are going to have some chai biscuit, whatever, something dhokla and this and that. And by the time it's come down again, 8:39, we are going to have a large dinner, right? So these are the sugar spikes, right? In a day, 4 or 5 sugar spikes. Now what happens to insulin? What happens to insulin is, insulin is, remember, it takes longer time to come back to baseline. So insulin is again going to come up, and by the time it's here, it's oops, more sugar has come in. So it's going to go here again, and oops, more sugar, and oops, more sugar. And so insulin is really not coming down to the baseline at all. And this is happening by age 35. This is really what is happening by age 35. And by the time we are 40, 42, what is happening, let me change color, is, insulin is almost like this. Insulin just like this. It's really not at all coming to baseline. Remember that, in any biologic system, if there is too much of anything, it's going to cause resistance. Too much of antibiotics cause antibiotic resistance, right? So, too much of anything is going to cause resistance. Similarly, when there is too much of insulin, it's going to cause resistance. And there are a lot of mechanisms of how that might happen. But let's take an example. So this is initially when somebody is insulin sensitive. Insulin is coming. This is much younger in life. That glucose is going inside and all is well. But later on, insulin has come. It is bound. But there is no sugar coming in. Why? Because this cell, this fat cell, say for example, which is in your stomach, or the visceral fat, is saying, oh, I've had too much. So what is really happening is, this is a nice meme. So this is a Tokyo train in Tokyo. People are wanting to get in so much that there are police at each door to push people inside. So this is what insulin is doing. Insulin is taking that extra sugar that we are consuming, and it is pushing it into the fat cell, pushing it. And once the door closes, it's going in. The fat cell says, oh, I can't take it anymore. The body is producing more insulin, right? Remember, it's not going to come back within 6 hours, within 8 hours, within 10 hours. It's just not, because there is so much insulin being produced all the time. Just to digress, how are we treating diabetes? We are treating diabetes with insulinogogues. We are giving drugs to increase insulin secretion. Can you beat that? So we have it all wrong, because insulin is already high. So type 2 diabetes is a problem of high insulin and not low insulin. So let's come back to this. When this is happening, remember that this is like a fat cell. The fat cell is increasing in size. There is hypertrophy, and our tummies are coming out little by little, more and more. That fat cell has a limit. Now it will say, I can't take any more of this. Glucose coming in and getting converted to fat is going to get released out from the other end. Some of these people are going to start dropping out from the other side, and that's when you're going to get fat in circulation, right? And that's what we say, that fat leaking in outside is called high triglycerides, right? So the early sign of somebody having insulin resistance is having high triglyceride levels or high total cholesterol, right? So these are some of the early signs, because fat cells are the ones which start getting insulin resistant right at the beginning. The second cells which start getting insulin resistant are muscle cells. Skeletal muscle is perhaps the biggest organ in the body and the maximum consumer of glucose, right? So when the same thing, this pushing is happening, and pushing and shoving is happening in the skeletal muscle, remember, can actually save it as skeletal glycogen, but only to a certain extent. After that, the skeletal muscle, after many years, says, oops, I can't take it anymore. The body will say, oh, I'm going to break it down. After a while, what is going to happen is that key is just going to remain hanging there. The door is never going to open up. Once that doesn't happen, what is going to happen is insulin resistant. The fat cells and muscle cells are going to have insulin resistance. That key is just going to not be as effective as it would. The body is going to produce more and more. We are going to try and break down this door, but then after a while, it's just not going to work. And then what really is going to happen is insulin is then going to look to the liver, or it's almost happening simultaneously, but the liver can actually convert a lot of this glucose into something called glycogen, right? That's a storage form, right? So insulin increases glucose conversion to glycogen, right? So glycogenesis. So it doesn't allow the liver to release any glucose, because its whole function is to reduce blood glucose levels, right? Also, so the liver is the detox sort of the default detox. So it takes glucose, it stores it as glycogen. It takes the triglycerides, which are all in circulation, and it also produces some amount of cholesterol, and then it never stores it just like that, but it binds it to protein called lipoproteins, and that we call LDL, low density lipoproteins. Lipoprotein, lipo is lipid and protein is protein, right? So all of this is going to get converted and keep getting stored into the liver, and it can be seen on an ultrasound as fatty liver, right? So these are all early signs of insulin resistance, right? Somebody having fatty liver, somebody having high triglyceride levels, and the muscles are not able to use, feeling tired, lethargic, not wanting to work, right? So this is essentially what is happening, and what we're really looking now at is insulin resistance. Imagine what is going to happen when the liver starts saying, I don't want this extra sugar, I can't handle it anymore. What then is going to happen is, so these are all the blood cells, this is inside a blood vessel, all this yellow are all glucose molecules. Glucose is going to remain into circulation. Glucose is not going to be taken up by the skeletal muscle, not going to be taken up by anybody else, and then you're going to have high glucose levels, and that is called diabetes, right? So diabetes is really the end stage of insulin resistance, right? So it really goes step by step, isn't it? So like I said, there's too much glucose, or there's too much carbohydrates that we're consuming, and that leads to insulin resistance, because insulin is getting spiked more and more. That affects fat cells, we become obese, we start getting triglyceridemia, and we start getting fatty liver, and our skeletal muscles also start suffering, and this is nothing but diabetes, right? So so if it's a glucose centric paradigm for managing diabetes, if you wait till your blood glucose is high and you need anti-diabetic medications or glucose lowering medications, you're already too late, because this process takes about a decade or more, right? So that's why most people in India today are getting diabetic in their mid 40s, late 40s, early 50s, and that means insulin resistance is starting by 35, 37, 40. And imagine, in the US, about 12 to 15 children below age 15 are insulin resistant today. It all has to do with too much consumption of carbohydrates, and too many times. You're eating too much carbs too many times, isn't it? So if you trace it all back, you'll realize that this is the real problem. This is like the cascade. This is like the first step which we need to take care of. Now what happens to the blood vessels when there is insulin is, these are the blood vessel cells. These are called endothelial cells, and some of them are called pericytes, and they start getting damaged because insulin is going to cause production of free radicals and reactive oxygen species. You've heard about all of this, and this is going to cause ulceration onto these blood vessel walls. And gradually, when there is an ulcer inside, imagine if you're a dentist, or say you are somebody who brushes twice a day. If you brush for half an hour, you're going to be in trouble. If you brush for a whole day, your whole mouth is going to have ulcerations. If you brush for a whole month, you're not going to be left with any teeth. The same thing is happening, if you dive inside your blood vessels and you start brushing the internals of your blood vessels with a toothbrush and do it for ages together, what will happen is tremendous amount of ulceration, and it's going to then lead to something like this, right? All this ulceration is going to attract platelets, and all of this is going to create plaques. These are called plaques, right? And then calcium starts getting deposited into them, and then this lumen becomes narrow. What we're talking about, of course, is cardiovascular disease, isn't it? So you're looking at all this cascade and how it is all happening, right? So if there is insulin resistance for good amount of time, you're going to have this. So you need to check whether your coronary arteries have some calcium in them, and only then will you know whether you have insulin resistance for a long time or for a short period of time, right? So this is really the mechanism, and this is not only happening in the arteries of the heart, it's happening pretty much all over the body, right? There are other parts of the body which are getting affected, especially the brain, right? So the brain is now also getting insulin resistant. Imagine, we drown in seawater, that because we can't consume it. Same way, the brain has hyperglycemia, or more glucose in circulation, but it's resistant to insulin. Brain really depends upon glucose, but it's not able to utilize that glucose, because of which there is, the whole mood is down and you're tired right in the morning, like I showed you in the beginning. It's all going to be traced back to insulin resistance, right? So this is really what is going to happen, and all of this increases the risk of long-term diseases like Alzheimer's disease, like Parkinson's disease, and like many other things. So the brain really gets affected. All the firing neurons in the brain are going to start slowing down. So all the the activities is not going to be as powerful as it could, right? And this is sort of underestimated a little bit, but it's real. It's a fact that you are not going to be able to perform as much as you could. It's like you are inebriated with glucose, and it is like consuming alcohol but without a hangover. So people who have a little bit of alcohol and know the high will realize that you enjoy the high but you don't enjoy the lows. Glucose does something similar, gives you the high, but it does not give you the hangover, right? But then that high doesn't last, right? You crash a lot. So then that really affects mental health a lot. Remember, glucose or insulin is also anabolic. It leads to increase in cell growth, and it increases risk of cancer. So all these cells start proliferating. A prime example of anabolic effect of insulin is, if somebody has gestational diabetes, where a pregnant mother has diabetes, these cells are proliferating. So this is increased risk of cancer in an animation. But gestational diabetes, that is diabetes in a pregnant woman, will lead to a child being about 4 kilos 200 grams. That's a very large baby, right? So that's because insulin is anabolic, right? So it is actually a growth factor. So too much insulin in circulation is going to increase your risk of cancer, right? That's because a lot of DNA breakdown and repair is happening all over the body all the time. But then if there is somebody to fuel it and say, oh, this cancer cell is better than the others, and let me make him grow more, you're going to increase the risk of cancer. So many of these problems are all related to insulin. So understand that diabetes really needs to be redefined, isn't it? It's not about blood sugar. And it's like saying somebody has fever, but I'm just giving him paracetamol. I'm just treating the fever. But why is there fever? The fever could be because of typhoid or malaria or whatever that may be. There are so many causes. But why is there hyperglycemia? There is only one cause. That is hyperinsulinemia and insulin resistance. So why are we not at all talking about insulin resistance? Why are we not measuring insulin resistance? Why are we giving sulfonylureas or glipizide, gliclazide and all of those that some of you may be having and some of your relatives may be having, when they are actually insulinogogues? They are increasing insulin production in the body, right? So perhaps there is something missing there, right? So how do you approach this, or how I approach this? I'll just quickly show you a little zoom in on all of these. So step one, let's go back. Step one is to know your own metabolic profile. So do you have insulin resistance? So if, like I said, if you're obese and if you are having a little bit of borderline sugar, borderline HbA1c and a borderline triglyceridemia, don't take that borderline as okay. It's not okay, right? So first and foremost, you need to see your blood glucose, and it should really, after 12 to 13 hours of fasting, it should be almost below 80. That's ideal, but below 90 is all right. Fasting insulin, serum insulin is something you must measure. After 12 or 13 hours of fasting, you must do serum insulin levels. You can easily tell the lab, and somebody who measured insulin for the first time actually got a Nobel Prize, because measuring insulin is not easy, but now it is very easy. It's automated and the results come in about 2 to 3 hours. And then, of course, HbA1c, it ideally should be less than 5.5. Then what we do is calculate the HOMA-IR ratio. So I'll just try and show you what the HOMA-IR ratio is. And what you can actually do is go to Google and just say HOMA-IR calculator, and it will give you this. So HOMA is homeostatic model assessment for insulin resistance. You will get this page, where you actually simply have to plug in your values. So homeostatic model assessment for insulin resistance, right? So this is the insulin levels and this is the glucose levels, right? So let me put my levels. So if you see normal, it shows 0 to 25. My levels are 26. It's just about borderline. It's not that bad. You will say, oh, it's fine. And glucose is normal is from 70 to 105. Mine was 92. I'll say, oh, everything looks great. I'm just on the borderline. My HOMA-IR ratio, there is a calculator at the back end, and I can send you those complicated formulae, but it's not worth it. So my HOMA-IR ratio is 5.9. It clearly says, yes, several studies suggest that a cutoff of more than 2 shows insulin resistance. So ideally, you should be less than 1. Between 1 and 2 is okay. It's just borderline. Anything more than 2 is insulin resistance. So 2.1 or 2.3 is insulin resistance. Of course, 5.9 is like a huge amount of insulin resistance. So after having sampled about 60 or 70 of my colleagues, I have not seen anyone but 2 who have such high levels of insulin like mine. Right? This glucose is fine. It's totally okay. It's less than 100 or it's 90. Another time I did it was 88. Another time I did it was 86. But my insulin levels were persistently 26, 25, even slightly more, 26 point something. So, this 5.9 means I am almost at an 80% risk of getting diabetes over the next 2 years. If your ratio is 5, that risk is 70%. If your ratio is 4, that risk is about 60%. If your ratio is 3, that risk is about 50%. That's half of people with insulin resistance levels of 3.5 will get diabetes over the next 2 years, right? So that's a very large number, right? So it's quite scary, right? So there are 3 things you must do. First is fasting glucose, fasting serum insulin, hemoglobin A1C, and HOMA-IR ratio. And ideal should be less than 1, but less than 2 is all right at the beginning. Fasting lipid profile, like I said, that's because triglycerides are the ones which we are worried about, right? So triglycerides are the ones which are high with insulin resistance, and HDL is the well packaged cholesterol that the liver is sending to the rest of the body. So triglycerides to HDL ratio should be less than 1.5, right? Where that means that triglycerides really should be below 100. So we say 150, 160 it's fine, and the lab says less than 200 is okay or something like that. But remember that ratio is really important, right? Because that is the next thing that you should see. So free fatty acid levels are not worth doing. Adipo-IR ratio is something that we could also do, but it's expensive, and so I don't recommend it because it costs something like 20,000-25,000, and it's not worth doing. Abdominal ultrasound to document fatty liver staging is extremely important again, right? So stage 1 fatty liver is different from stage 2 fatty liver, right? Stage 2 is going into it's going into steatosis, and then stage 3, stage 4 is basically cirrhosis, right? So we are looking at reversal. So at the baseline you need to understand whether you have fatty liver and what is the stage, and then this is really crucial. CT coronary angiography for the CAC score. I showed you that before, right? That cartoon before, where the coronaries are getting narrow. So if there is calcium, so I haven't put up some photographs, but some of people who I have interacted with have high CAC scores of 600 and plus, right? So that means they are already compromised, right? That they have insulin resistance for long periods of time. And of course, please measure your weight, like I showed you, like serial measurements, waist circumference, and ideally waist circumference into 2 should be less than your height, right? So remember that first and foremost, the starting point is your HOMA-IR ratio. If it's more than 2, you need to do things that we'll discuss in the next 15 minutes. If it's not, then you're all right. But then, very likely a lot of us are, at least 60-70% of the American population, we don't have that number for India. Over 40 is insulin resistant today. Can you imagine the numbers, like in India with our diet, and it's really high. So the first and foremost is insulin resistance. Damage caused by hyperinsulinemia we've already discussed, right? So liver basically, it leads to glycogenolysis. It makes excess glucose later on. That's because it's getting insulin resistant. It leads to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and then steatohepatitis, that is NASH, and then reverse cirrhosis. Adipose tissue, we have already seen why, right? It causes truncal obesity with big bellies, and you'll see thin men with big bellies. That's really like the worst. Of course, blood vessels we have seen, vascular endothelial damage, and then causes blockages. Reproductive health suffers in women. PCOS in women is very common, especially in the post-pubertal age. That's because insulin is extremely important for conversion of the testosterone analogs into estrogen and progesterone, right? So estradiol is not produced well in girls who have insulin resistance. That's why they are little fat, and they have a bit of hirsutism and other things. It all traces back to insulin resistance. So how do you reverse this? And that's what I did, and that's what we need to all do. And this is really the only way, and there is no other way, right? So that's first and foremost. If you remember that cascade, it all starts with too much carbohydrates, right? So carbohydrate causes spike in blood glucose and insulin spikes. You need to stop this, right? You need to just stop insulin spikes. So carbohydrates have to be stopped. If you have insulin resistance, you need to stop all carbohydrates. So no rice, no wheat, no sugar, no jaggery, nothing. So stop all fructose if possible. You can eat some fruits. Remember, we are not even talking about fructose. We're talking about glucose. Insulin doesn't affect fructose metabolism, and we'll talk about that some other time. But you can eat some fruits in small quantities, especially fruits with low GI index. You can't have sweet mangoes like 3-4, or like amras 2-3. What is amras? You just cannot do that, especially when you're insulin resistant. So when you think back now, you'll say, oops, I did that, and I'm not going to do it next year, right? So don't drink fruit juices. You can eat fruit a little bit. You can't drink fruit juices at all forms of soda, so Sprite, Coke, Pepsi, these are all really killers, so like cigarette packets say smoking kills. Similarly, I think Pepsi and Coke need to say Coke kills, Pepsi kills, because that is really what is reality. Say Salman Khan says aaj kuch tufani karte hain or something like that, and then lakhs and lakhs of teenagers start having Pepsi and Coke and thumbs up. I think that really causing a lot of damage, right? So once you stop carbohydrates, you need to replace it with protein. So you need to have 1 gram per kilogram body weight of protein every day, if you, especially even if you're not working out, right? So it gives good satiety, it prevents hunger pranks. You will feel full for 7-8 hours if you eat 4 eggs or like 100 grams of paneer. You will not feel the need to eat for the next 8 to 10 hours, and there are lots of mechanisms. One example is the gut releases hormones. One of them is called GLP-1, that is glucagon like peptide 1, and that goes to the brain and tells the brain, oh, there is satiety, पेट भरा हुआ है भाई, and it reduces that, actually reduces gastric emptying, right? So you start feeling full for long periods of time, right? And there is a GLP-1 analog which is now available for an injection, that is that's called semaglutide, and the trade name is called Ozempic, right? So these are being now used for treatment of diabetes as well as weight, so I thought I'll bring it up. And of course, high protein will replenish your muscle reserves, your peptide hormone levels, your thyroid, and all of these hormones are all proteins. And there are so many more advantages of high protein diet, right? So you need to replace carbohydrates with protein. What you can eat, animal protein, of course, is whey, that is or meat or fish. So whey is from milk. Eggs, of course, eat white and yellow. You can boil, you can scramble, you can poach, you can omelette in all forms. Dairy products, cottage cheese, that is paneer, and curd, these are relatively high sources of protein. And sprouts, fresh vegetables, whole fruits, not juiced fruits, water and supplements, like I said, magnesium and omega-3, these will help. Fasting is a very big hack. Fasting, why? Because if you eat less number of times, that insulin is going to come back to baseline. If you remember the drawing that we did, and the insulin is not at all able to come back to baseline. So it takes at least 8 to 10 hours for the insulin to come back to baseline, right? So if you can do 14 hours fasting per day, so you really need to eat 2 meals 10 hours apart. That's what I did. It increases insulin sensitivity. Your insulin levels start going down, and that is really what we want, isn't it? So this fast is a part of all religions, isn't it? So starting from from Jainism to Islam, of course, to Hinduism, to all of these, there is some form of fasting or the other. So forefathers may not have known these biochemical or microbiologic changes that are happening inside us, but they sure knew that it's going to make us healthier, right? So try and go to fasting after a little while. At least 24-hour fast per week is recommended. At least one fast a week. You can keep longer fasts over time if that is possible, right? And try and exercise. It improves muscle mass, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Which and how, we'll talk a little bit more about exercise later on. Protein requirement for vegetarians especially will not be complete with just a vegetarian diet. So if you need 75 to 80 grams of protein a day, it's almost impossible to get that much amount of protein. Remember that the quality of protein matters. Essential amino acids, there are 9 essential amino acids, including some important ones like tryptophan and tyrosine, which are important for production of serotonin and dopamine and many others in the brain. They all require all of these 9 essential amino acids. Plant proteins does not have this, cannot give you this. Even if they have, they are not able to absorb by the gut. So you need to take perhaps some external protein. For even non-vegetarians, you are taking enough protein, but still, if you want to have a protein powder or a shake, it's better to have a plant protein. So the one that I use, and I have no financial interest in this, is called Cosmix. So remember, if you have protein, it will also increase your insulin a little bit. It will spike, but not as bad as carbohydrate, right? So quick word about protein there. We've known about this intermittent fasting for long periods of time since 1962. This was the first paper which was published, and this was actually for therapy by Garfield Duncan in 1962. But very recently, as August 6th, 2024, that's like 10 days back, so there is an international consensus on fasting terminology. Somebody says intermittent fasting, somebody says this, somebody says that. So now the real terminology that is now established is time restricted eating, right? So TRE, or there are many others. You can actually look at full text of that paper. So for lack of time, we won't go into a PubMed search, but once you do a PubMed search, you will realize, and with time restricted eating, you'll realize that out of the 3,700 articles, nearly 2,000 articles, that is 2/3 or almost 60%, have been published after 2020, and more is on its way. So literature is evolving very rapidly, and hopefully these will come into, but then when we see these trends historically, it takes at least 10 to 15 years for it to come into daily practice, for physicians to actually order serum insulin and then tailor your treatment based on your insulin levels. It's perhaps another 10 years, maybe 15 years away for India, and by that time a lot of us might have irreversible damage, right? So try and do a PubMed search and you will realize what I'm talking about. This is from a nice paper. So this is what it means by eating over extended periods of time. So this is over a 12-year, so somebody is eating over 14-15 hours and not eating for some 7-8 hours. They have high risk of obesity, cardiovascular, cardiometabolic disease and liver disease, sleep quality, other things. We have already discussed some of these. And this is time restricted eating. So this is the green, that's somebody's eating, and these are the advantages. So so what you can really do is use your bedtime, that should be at least 8 hours. Remember, if you're not sleeping enough, you will have high cortisol levels, and that will also spike your insulin or glucose levels. Also, you will have high adrenaline or epinephrine levels in your circulation. That will also cause high glucose levels. So lack of sleep is something that we can discuss for a whole 1 hour, but then try and sleep for at least 8 hours and eat within a 8-hour period. So we are looking at 14 hours of fasting, not starving, fasting, and out of that 8 hours is sleep. So we are actually looking at not eating only for 6 hours. So it's really not that difficult. And then you're looking, so you're eating at 10 in the morning, or say 10 in the morning, and then you're eating at 8 in the evening. That's like really doable, isn't it? And then do some light, moderate exercises. These are all the advantages of doing this time restricted eating, and these have been shown not only in human studies but also in animal models, in all kinds of models. Sleep disorders, to Alzheimer's disease, stroke risk, breast cancer risk, ischemic damage, polycystic ovarian disease, to dyslipidemia, hypertension. I've told you all the all of these quite in detail of why these might happen. So this is really all the advantages that you get by eating well. So if you eat well, you can actually get there. So I'll just go to the next slide. So what is really happening here is you are having relatively low sugar in circulation, and you are having hypoinsulinemia. Quickly try and understand what this is doing to the cells, because remember, the cells in the body depend upon glucose for energy, for ATP production. So we are going to talk a little bit about the Krebs cycle way back from medical days, and we're not going to go into any details. What I wanted to actually show you is there are 3 substrates: glucose, fatty acids and amino acids. Breakdown of these, that's called oxidation, will lead to acetyl CoA formation, and the Krebs cycle, which will lead to production of ATP, adenosine triphosphate, right? So do you know that glucose, one molecule will give 30 to 32 ATP, while one molecule of fat or fatty acids, that's triglycerides, will give you 106 ATP. That's almost 3.5 times more. Then why does the body prefer glucose over fatty acids? And a couple of quick answers is it's rapid, right? It's very rapid. Having glucose to burn gives you ATP rapidly. Nobody wants to wait. And burning fat is slow. Second thing is you can burn glucose even without oxygen, whereas you need oxygen all the time and good oxygen flow for burning fatty acids. The implications of this are, and of course there is insulin, which is pushing glucose inside all these cells. So when you are in a fasted state, there is not much glucose there, right? So then body is then going to depend upon fatty acids. Remember, you can use so there is no glucose. Just one second. So there is no glucose now. So the body is actually going to depend upon. Fatty acids, right? So now fatty acids will start getting broken down for when you're fasted state, when there is not much glucose. That happens after a few hours, at least 8 to 10 hours, and from day one. This will happen from day one. However, fatty acids will burn only when you have enough oxygen and you're doing an activity which is slow. So early in the morning, when you're in a fasted state, what is that activity you can do which is slow, where you can breathe aram se, you can talk perhaps to somebody else and not feel excessively tired. Just think about this. You can do it aram se, slow, steady, breathe aram se, because you need to take that oxygen. Only then will the fatty acids burn. Can you run? You can't run, right? Yes, walking, isn't it? So that's the whole idea for walking. Walking is the one which will lose you fat. It may not use you weight straight away, but walking is that, the whole funda of why you should start walking first and not straight away running or doing weights. Even if you're doing weights, it's like, you're like breathing heavily, so then you're not going to have enough glucose. Imagine a pyre or a havan which is happening, and the and the person and the pujari is actually putting glucon D into that pyre. It's going to go black, charred, and it's going to just go away because it burns rapidly and happens quickly. But instead what he uses is ghee, right, or some form of oil, because it happens slowly, and then you fan it so that there is oxygen. So that's the same thing is happening in your muscles internally. And so just requesting all of you to just mute yourselves so that it's not disturbing others. Please mute yourselves, right? So then walking in the morning, this is the whole funda behind walking. So how much should you walk? Before that, brain cannot use fatty acids. The brain just cannot use fatty acids. You're fasting, there is not much glucose. Amino acids are not broken down, so just forget this. Brain can't use fatty acids. So what is happening is the brain can use only one other source other than glucose, and that's called ketones. So in a fasted state, if you're able to walk a little bit longer, what will happen is liver will start converting these fatty acids into ketones. Ketones cross the blood-brain barrier, and ketones will be utilized. The brain just loves ketones, because ketones burn much rapidly, actually even faster than glucose. That's because glucose has to go through glycolysis before, if you remember. Ketones just straight away come into this and get you 2-acetyl-CoAs, beta hydroxybutyrate, acetyl, acetoacetone, if you remember those basic MBBS terms. So ketones will burn very quickly. The brain loves ketones. If you can be in ketosis, you will be in the best mood all day. That's the reason why people who walk early in the morning on a fasted state will say, oh, I'm having a great day. That's, so these are all the sort of, the biochemical backgrounds behind some of this. So start walking in the mornings. So, what kind of exercise to do? Should I do aerobic exercises? Should I do weights? It has to be a combination of both of these. If you want to prefer one, perhaps weights are better. That's because, if you're doing weights, your muscle mass is increasing, and muscles are then going to crave glucose. And remember, it's that insulin resistance is because muscles are saying, I don't want glucose. Why? Oh, I'm not doing any activity. But as soon as muscles start doing activity, your glucose requirement increases. Overall insulin resistance goes down, right? So if you want to walk, when do you start? Or when do you start all of this? At least after losing 10% of your body weight. So if your ideal body weight is, say your body weight is 110 kilos, you will start anything after losing at least 10% of your body weight. Otherwise, you're going to start getting injured, you're going to start getting fatigued, right? So in the beginning, just diet. 99% of it is just with proper diet. When to start is once you have lost a little bit of body weight and you're feeling good about yourself, and how much. See, these are all well studied, and the recommendation is 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity, MVPA, per week. So if you're doing 50 minutes, you will do thrice a week. If you're doing 40 minutes, you will do 4 times a week. If you're doing half an hour, you will do 5 times a week. And moderate to vigorous means, for most people, it is like walking for 1 kilometer in 10 minutes, give or take a little bit. If somebody is taller, then you will do it in like 9.5 minutes. And if somebody is shorter, you will do it like in about 10 seconds, 15 seconds extra. But that is the pace that you need to maintain. So, that is, so how will you do that? If you unless you're wearing a tracker, you need to do, so you need to a little bit invest in yourselves. So first and foremost, I think it's important to buy a proper watch, right? So an Apple Watch or a Samsung Watch is great for entertainment, but it's not good enough for, a lot of parameters. This is Garmin. This is what I use. This is Garmin Forerunner 245. So cost is about 30,000, but there are far cheaper variants of Garmin starting from about 12 or 13,000. The one parameter that they give you is called VO2 max. VO2 max is the ability to use oxygen efficiently. Remember that Krebs cycle, or if you are running and you're fasted, then fatty acids are going to be broken, but then you need rapid energy, right? So glucose, the muscles are still going to look to glucose because I want it now. I'm running, I want it now, right? Now what will happen is the body will start going into lactic acidosis, or into start producing acids if you are not able to use enough glucose, able to provide enough oxygen Because what I'm really trying to say is that if your VO2 max is high enough, then you will be able to run even on an empty stomach, right? So the VO2 max has to slowly keep going higher and higher, and that will tell you that you are on the right track. If there is one parameter, forget insulin levels, forget weight, forget everything else, if there is one parameter you really want to track, it's VO2 max, if you can, right? So, and you need a good watch for that. Invest in good shoes, so I like Asics a lot. Otherwise, Saucony is there or Brooks is there. I'm not even talking about Adidas and Nike, because a lot of these are not meant for such vigorous activities. And remember that we can go into a lot of details about running and other things, but for another day. And this is also something that you should all perhaps think about. This is called the Freestyle Libre glucose monitor. This is called continuous glucose monitoring. This is on my hand. So this is a device which you can actually stick it on your hand, and then you take your phone close, and it'll actually give you readings, like real-time readings of your sugar. So what is the food stuff which is raising your sugar, what is the food stuff which is not raising your sugar, so all of those you can actually maintain a diary and understand. So these are all things that you can actually just invest in easily. For running enthusiasts, it's important to have good form and gait, prevent pronation, to prevent injuries. Cadence is important, how many steps you're taking. If you're overarching, you will get injuries. So there's something called metronome, which it's like it'll your earphones will play tuck tuck tuck, and you have to just follow that. Balance on midfoot, your pace, core strength and weights are really important if you want to do long distance running. Cross training is really important, where you are not just running, but you're also doing either cycling or swimming along with that, as well as weights, right? So this is a quick somebody asked me to put this in, so I thought why not do that. So what we're really talking about here in one word is intermittent fasting, that is eating for 10 hours and fasting for 14. And we are talking about being in a ketogenic state, right, where we are zero carbs, we are high proteins, and we are high fat, right? So really what I'm doing is intermittent fasting with ketogenesis, or trying to be in ketosis, right? So this is really the whole sort of the holy grail. It's a well hidden truth somehow, I feel. A lot of people don't know this, but then if you can do this, you can beat anything and be very healthy. So these are some good books. This is a good book by Jason Fung, again by Jason Fung. So he was the first one to sort of think about this in that way back in 2009-10, and so he's written a couple of books. The Diabetic Code is also pretty nice. And this is another book called Lifespan, where David Sinclair says we don't have to age, and really talks a lot about good effects of hypoinsulinemia on longevity, on health span, on lifespan. And we can talk about this for a very long period of time. And there are some things which he recommends and are not not evidence based all the time, but then it's a good read nonetheless, where for example he says take metformin, but then metformin can have bad effects on longevity. So other things is, so he has some he has some companies which are making some products, and he has conflicts of interest with some of the products he's written in the book. But nevertheless it's a good book. So you can actually think about discussing hypoinsulinemia and lifespan or health span is also for another day. We can have more lectures on this. This is one individual you must follow. This is Ben Bikman, and this is a podcast on all of these that you can actually think of. It's called the Metabolic Link or the Metabolic Classroom, and there are now a series of about 44 lectures. There are just lectures. He's just talking, but he explains it so nicely that it's really easy to understand. So these are some of the things that you can actually follow. So overall take home message, I think, is be well informed, understand your own insulin level. Right, if you are insulin resistant, you need to take some steps. If you are highly insulin resistant, you need to take drastic steps like I did. And if you are not insulin resistant, then watch out, you could be, because a lot of the world around you is. Right, document your changes like I showed you, your weights and how much you're running and all of how much you're eating, how much gram protein you're taking on a daily basis. Follow science, be a scientist. There is no need for willpower here, isn't it? Because if you're, you need not run at all. Be determined. I think the final take home message is that you can actually do it, prioritize it, and you can actually do it, right? So greatest wealth is health. There's no question about it. Even if you published like 200 papers but you're unhealthy, and you have like $1 billion and you're unhealthy, you can't enjoy it, right? So people like Rakesh Junjunwala and so many others haven't lived just beyond 60, but then I would really not want to be in those shoes, right? So try and be healthy, and then you will be wealthy. So thank you so much. And before I go, I can't end this without thanking Dr. Rupal Dalal, who is actually a pediatrician by training, and and now because she's a pediatrician, she works with breastfeeding and doing phenomenal work at IIT Bombay, and she's helped me discover really my mojo about health and all of this. So, and on the right, this is my wife Mohana, and she's been the backbone of the driving force behind all of this, preparing all my meals and keeping me on my toes. She's the one whom I really need to thank so much. And thank you so much. And I'll open it up to questions, and I hope we have enough questions. So I'll just stop my sharing. Yeah, Asit, you were asking a question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, my question to you is, I have tried doing this 3 times from 2017.
Okay.
First time I lost around 14 kgs.
Okay.
At that time I did weight training and aerobic exercise alternate days.
Right.
And I lost a lot of protein mass. And that time my understanding was quite vague.
Right.
The next successive 2 times I did, one was in COVID and then one was in just couple of years back. I lost around 20 kgs.
Right.
But it was very difficult to have this sustainable. So when you talk about diet and when you talk about changing our dietary habits, how do you find it sustainable over a period of 5 years, 6 years, 7 years? How do you keep it going in that manner?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost we need to
I have a second question. That diets should be something that is easy for your elderly parents as well as your kids to follow. So could you give us that trick? Does your kid and does your elderly people in the family follow the same diet, or it is personalized for you and they follow some other diet?
Yeah, so I think two great questions. How do you make it sustainable? First and foremost, it has to just be a way of life, that I'm just going to eat twice a day, and not just because I want to lose weight, but I want to have low insulin levels. And I think it's good to have some goals, like I want to run this marathon, or I want to do this kind of weight training, or something like that. So that keeps you overall motivated. But generally it has to be just a way of life where you say, this is how it's going to be from now on. And once you get addicted to that, that mental status, it's like your 2.0 self. You need to keep telling yourself, this is me, this is the new me, and it really is, isn't it? So once you are the new me, and people start saying, oh, I can't recognize you, so some of my patients put their head into the cubicle and say, can I meet Dr. Sengupta? They are asking me, so that kind of thing happens. It actually motivates you. So it has to be a way of life. It can't just go back to how it was. One second thing is, do others have eat this or follow this? So like my mother, she was on 5 medications for diabetes. Now she's on 1 medication for diabetes, and she has lost 7 kilos weight, and it's like a whole new her. So it's relatively easy. It's like people ask me, don't you have cheat days? But then I'm cheating all the time, isn't it? Because I'm just eating the good stuff, right? I'm just eating the chicken or the paneer or whatever. I'm not just eating rice and chapati. That's pretty much what I'm doing. I'm eating everything else. And now that I'm insulin sensitive, I'm also having ice creams or what have you. Remember that having a little bit of carbs at the end is all right once you're insulin sensitive. That's because that sugar spike is far lower. And then if you want to restart carbs, once you are insulin levels are getting controlled, you can have that glucose monitor and see, and then you can perhaps have some jawar or bajra, chapati or something like that, which are complex carbs, take time to break down. So then your satiety is also a little longer and spikes are lower. The whole idea is to have as few spikes as possible. So it really depends on different people, but then it has to be a way of life. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
Sunny, it's a very nice presentation. Amit here.
Yes, Amit.
And I would like to ask, during those fasting period, people who are just starting after looking at your wonderful presentation, how to prevent the hypoglycemic spikes? Most of them might be diabetic or they may be normal, but during the fasting period, they might have a hypoglycemic spike. So how to prevent those spikes?
First and foremost, if somebody is already a diabetic and on medications, then it's already beyond that tipping point, isn't it? So then they have to be careful. understand if you are, so I'm not a diabetologist, but understand if you are on a insulinogogue rather, so let's say a sulfonylurea, then that is going to cause insulin production, isn't it? And then you are going to get hypoglycemic. So if you are on insulinogogues, 2-3 classes of medications which are insulinogogues are then going to cause problems. That is one. So metformin is relatively safe. Metformin does not cause hypoglycemia. Metformin is perhaps the only one which is not directly insulinogogue and doesn't have that many bad effects. And even pioglitazones are not, but then they cause adiposity and people really gain weight on pioglitazone. So so first and foremost, if you are only on metformin and diabetic only on metformin, you can still do this. But if you are on other medications, then you can get hypoglycemic spells. So I
But
think
if
that
you
is.
are on gliptins, if you are on gliptins also,
Yeah.
then those are also like they don't cause too much of hypoglycemic episode. But problem is that if you eat less in terms of carbs, then then that leads to the hypoglycemic effect later on very early.
Actually, that's not true, because if you are not just not eating carbs, you are eating high protein and you're eating high fat. That fat is going to be utilized for energy production. Beta oxidation is going to happen. So, I don't think cells are going to start, being hungry all the time. So, another thing is your satiety is also going to be quite full for a long period of time. So you don't feel hungry, and then you don't have to starve. So even if you are on anti-diabetic medications, the chance of hypoglycemia is slightly higher. But then I don't think that is going to happen a lot. What does happen though is dehydration. So if you are fasting for prolonged periods, not just 14 hours, so you can have salt with water or maybe lemon water, something like that. But I don't think, I have been working with at least 35-40 people, not all of them diabetic, but very few are complaining of getting giddiness and falling over with hypoglycemia. So I think it's a little, it's not a reality. You can use a CGM to actually document and see whether what you're actually experiencing is hypoglycemia or something else.
How much the CGM cost?
It's about 5,000. It lasts for 14 days.
But that is only for the sensor. What about the machine?
No, it's just on the phone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyone else? I think there are some questions in the chat box.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just go over some of
Dr.
them.
Sengupta,
Yeah, please go ahead, madam.
there's one topic that you didn't touch upon, which is very close to the Indian heart. What do you do with tea, coffee during the 3 hours that you don't eat in the morning? Like you don't drink water or tea or coffee.
Yeah, so
In that period.
right. So basically, when you're having your meals, you can't have glucose spikes, right? So then, milk has lactose, which is not like glucose, but still it will cause some spikes. So having, of course, having added sugar is not at all, you can't do that. So black tea or black coffee, that without, of course, sugar and milk, it's completely fine. If you want to have, tea and coffee
Okay,
with,
so in the fasting intermittent
you can have
one,
black tea and black
in that
coffee.
window.
Totally fine. Black tea, black coffee, green tea is totally fine. It is not good. So I have done my CGM monitoring with all of these. So they almost don't cause any spikes at all.
So do you recommend eliminating milk completely from the diet?
So milk has a lot of, if you want to ask me yes or no, if you want to choose, I'll say don't have milk. Don't have too much milk, or just don't have milk, because so casein is the only good part about milk. It's the protein in milk which is a good part about, but you can get it with whey powders and others. So but then the Indian this thing is like, oh, milk is good, right? So of course for kids and all it's great, but then for us, especially somebody who's insulin resistant, milk it doesn't have a lot of, there is nothing in milk which you can't get from other food sources. So milk is not helpful. It'll add to the protein content if you're having it with a milk, protein powder. Like I run, say tomorrow I'm going to do like a 20-kilometer run. When I come back, I am going to need carbs. Right? So I'm going to have a protein shake with milk. So something like that you can do, but then overall try and avoid as much as possible. I'll just read out one very important write up which Dr. Sharang Vertikar has written. So he has talked about 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine which need to be addressed. First is diet, which is the most controversial. Second is exercise. Both cardiovascular and strength training are important. Then sleep well, tackle stress, avoid risky substances, and maintain good relationships. So I think it's really, all are really important ones to, to pay attention to.
Sir, I have one quick question here, sir.
Yeah.
Where do you place nuts and dry fruit in your diet? Do you recommend?
Yes, so dry fruits, out of that there are only two which are relatively good to take. One is walnuts and the other are almonds. These are only two which are okay to take. Kajus and kishmish and all that is high glycemic index, and they will spike your sugars, right? And that too in small quantities. There are many anti-nutrients in these seeds. Say, just to give you an analogy, so a seed which is made by a plant is for its reproduction, isn't it? So it's something which the plant wants to spread so that it increases in number. So then seeds are going to be heavily protected by the plant. Yeah, so that seed is going to be heavily protected by the plant. So we don't know, but there are a lot of the seed coverings have a lot of anti-nutrients. So there are many. I can't name all of them, but so those anti-nutrients prevent absorption of many other things. Say almond soaked in water and peeled off is far better than just eating an almond just like that. So almond and walnuts are all right. Most of the other dry fruits are not okay. Seeds, so flax seeds are an absolute no. Chia seeds sometimes are okay. So a lot of these are good nutritional value, but the anti-nutrients are something which are not highlighted by the manufacturers, right? So it's going to prevent absorption of, so a lot of these are actually goitrogens. Like flax seeds are goitrogens. So it's going to prevent absorption of iodine from the stomach. So it'll perhaps reduce your cholesterol levels, but it'll increase the risk of goiter and hypothyroidism. So so seeds perhaps not much. Dry fruits, in that almonds are okay, and walnuts are okay in limited numbers. Almonds peeled off perhaps are better than that.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, yeah.
Excuse me, sir. Can I ask something?
Yes, please go ahead.
You said something about eggs, consuming eggs.
Yes.
I missed that because there was a problem with the audio. Can you say that again, please?
So eggs are really the like the superfood for somebody who can consume eggs. But then eggs are good with proteins, are really high protein. They are really good fat, and there is something about eggs which there is nothing about eggs that I can say is something you should avoid. So eat as many eggs as you can. So and 1 gram of egg has about, a good large size egg has about 6 grams. A smaller egg will have about 5 grams of protein. So 4 eggs in the morning will give you like 24 grams of protein. Another scoop of, say, one of these protein shakes that I said, Cosmix is the name, that will give you another 24 grams. So in the morning you're loaded with 48 grams of protein. That will easily keep you going for 10 hours. And in the night, of course, eggs you can't eat twice a day. So you can eat paneer or tofu or perhaps an animal protein that you can. That will complete your protein requirement. I'll just take questions from the chat box. How much carbs per day were you consuming in terms of grams? So carbs, I was really consuming as little as I couldn't even count, or I couldn't actually count. So anything less than 20 grams carbs a day is all right. But then something that you need not really count, because you should try and avoid. So I did not eat any chapati or rice, or for that matter dal also, because dal, it is not high protein as you might think, because lentils and pulses are okay sources of protein, but they also have a lot of carbs. So then so don't count carbs. I think it's not a good idea. Okay, reading food labels is important. So brand of protein shake, so I use Cosmix. I'll just write it down on the COSMIX. Cosmix, this is what I actually use. Another couple of questions. What is the frequency of taking supplements? That's again a great question. So if so magnesium is the one which is very important for recovery. So if you're taking if you're running like me, it's like I do about, say, 30 kilometers a week. So if you're running that much, then you need to take a lot of magnesium. So I take magnesium twice a day, at least I try to, if I don't forget. And omega fat, omega 3 is just once a day is actually fine. And that's a very large capsule, that one I take from GNC. That's, I think, good enough. So another question, good one, is long-term effects of keto diet. So keto, or being in ketosis, so does it actually cause any harm, or does it cause any problem, right? So there have been some papers which have looked at adverse effects of these over long periods of time, but then most of the methodology is poor, and so we don't really know as yet, because like I said, over the last 2-3 years we don't have long-term studies. There are some long-term studies from the US where some data, a questionnaire was done like 10 years back, do you eat this, that, and then based on what they answered 10 years back, they are trying to tell us that the risk of cardiovascular disease is high and all of that. So unless you take one questionnaire every year at least, are you still on a ketogenic diet for 10 years, yes or no, and then you can say. But so there have not been much studies. What studies have been done is even randomized trials where people have said, you take a ketogenic diet and you don't take it, and over a year, that's like maximum follow-up that you have now, there have not been any bad effects of ketogenic diet as yet. So it seems to be at least okay now. So the benefits are far outweigh the risks of that. Next question was, you haven't talked about calories. So counting calorie in, calorie out, I don't think that's really what works now. You don't have to count calories at all, right? You need to count proteins. So just count the protein in terms of your kilogram body weights. 1 gram per kilogram body weight, at least that much protein you must intake. If you're a vegetarian, that is not easy. So you need to consume something from out. But then if you're a non-vegetarian, you can actually get away. If you're running, if you're doing physical activity, if you are already below the threshold of insulin sensitivity, or HOMA-IR ratio is below 2, then you can actually, you can you can do what you like. Okay, next question was, oil during cooking, change your cooking oil. So cooking oil, so again, the seed-based oils are not good. Seeds are not good. Seed-based oil, so even sunflower is a seed-based oil, or all of the seed-based oils, groundnut oil, sunflower oil, rice bran oil, none of them are good. All of them are going to increase your, they are going to play havoc with your fat metabolism overall. So then if you are able to run and do that much of physical activity, then it doesn't matter. But then best is to have food in ghee. Ghee is the best way to cook. So as much as possible, cook in ghee. So even my omelette or my or my scrambled eggs are actually in ghee now. So that really helps. Air fryers are another good way of cooking, so where you actually have, you don't have French fries with potatoes, but you can actually fry a lot of other things like cauliflowers and all in air fryers now without any oil. So that also helps. Alright, so it's far beyond the time that I had thought we would spend. So thank you so much, everyone, and I hope this has helped all of you. And if the recording has happened, then I am going to put this up on YouTube, and I will also try and send this PDF. You can get in touch with me, and I'll send you this PDF that I have made, right, on what are the tests to be done, what are the bad effects of insulin, and what are the, actually it's there on my Facebook, on Facebook as well as LinkedIn, where I've actually posted this. So you can actually go and follow me on, it's also there on Instagram. So I've just taken screenshots and put it there, so you can actually easily get it. It's not at all difficult. This kind of document is not there anywhere. It's very confusing, but then if you can read it from what I've, just 4 pages, no bullshit. It's like, the real deal. So try and get your hands on that, and if you can't, just get in touch with me. Thank you so much, everyone, and I hope we'll be able to do a little bit more of
Thank you,
these.
Dr. Sengupta.
Thanks,
I'd like to say, give you a vote of thanks.
Thank you so
I
much.
thought it was there's so much nutrition advice going. The only reason we joined is because of your skill at presentation and your obvious research skills. And my husband was just kind of listening to it with one ear, and then he said, "Oh my God, I got more information here than I would have gotten a month of Sundays."
That's
so
right.
we really do thank you for sharing your research with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
and
madam.
your journey.
Thank you, everyone, and have a great night. And I hope we'll meet soon for some other session like this. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye bye. Please spread the word. Yes, please spread the word. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.